According to work from Beltran and Begun, DST is a tool of interruption to current challenges faced by Indigenous communities, including the personal and collective transmission of historical trauma. Storytelling generally is used to help, quote, moderate the effects of life stressors on health outcomes in Indigenous communities, end quote. This mode of healing, however, was disrupted by colonization. Creating and sharing narratives is a form of reclaiming knowledge and highlighting the resilience in these communities. Personal agency allows digital storytellers to validate their identities and self-determine their own representation. Therefore, challenging stereotypes, including those of pan-Indigenous identity. Broadening diversity of representation can help counteract racism that emerges from others speaking for Indigenous communities. As previously mentioned, DST builds on sensibilities, voice, perspective, as well as capabilities, technological skills. This skills development can help Indigenous people, particularly youth, complete their education and engage in cyber citizenship and the digital economy. Furthermore, according to Broken Leg's Circle of Courage pedagogy, storytelling and rituals surrounding story can fulfill human needs of belonging, mastery, and independence, helping youth persist with their learning. Many of the potential benefits of digital storytelling as a culturally responsive pedagogy for Indigenous communities also represent some of the challenges of DST. Indigenous storytelling for reconciliation assumes relational accountability, both within and across communities. The audience must be selected by the storyteller and not assumed by others, which can be challenging in an unbounded cyberspace. Witnessing a digital story is, quote, an active, ethical, and mutual engagement, end quote. Therefore, placing accountability on the audience, which in this case may not be predetermined and cannot always be controlled. While indigenization in cyberspace might be possible, quote, settler systems dominate the machine market, end quote. Aspects of digital media, including its modularity, fragmentation, and dispersion, also structure racism and racial representation. Cherokee Hawaiian Samoan digital media poet, artist, and software designer Jason Edward Lewis, quote, reminds us that technology designers and developers design more than functionality. Rather, they design the epistemological protocols through which culture operates and what counts as knowledge, end quote. While we may have seen that many Indigenous digital storytellers have subverted the colonizing discourses associated with internet technologies, there is still a risk for recolonization by engaging online. To tell stories is to speak from the heart and to the heart of the listener. Therefore, digital storytelling involves some emotional risk. Storytelling is not always comfortable. Archibald, or Wakeum, compares it at times to looking for a bone needle in the dark. Sometimes we want to stay by the fire. In addition to emotional risk, it's possible that Indigenous storytellers may feel pressure to perform their indigeneity for audiences even against their wishes. As far back as 1996, Lucas called for action on telematics access for marginalized groups, particularly for Indigenous communities. This was imminent at the time as one way to preserve Indigenous language, many of which are at risk of extinction. An interview with Tim Michel, a member of the Secwepemc Nation and a University of British Columbia professor, conveys a similar need within the communities he works with. In his experience, access not only to machines and infrastructures of technology, but also the critical digital skills development is limited for Indigenous communities compared to other groups. Solutions to these challenges seem to be provided, at least in the research I looked at, through a community workshop model. Edmonds et al. Participated in the development of a digital storytelling app called What's Your Story with Indigenous Australian and Torres Strait youth. In this example, the digital storytelling app was designed and controlled by the youth themselves who receive support from the researcher, elders in the community, and IT professionals. Combining her work with others, the following is a suggested culturally responsive pedagogy for supporting Indigenous digital storytelling. The Indigenous storyteller remains at the center of the process, having control over content creation, editing, and dissemination. However, these people are not just individuals. They are an integral part of a community, which is why mentorship from elders and family is a key role within the model. This community can help with content provision as well as editing and dissemination. The facilitator, who may or may not also be a researcher, scaffolds digital skills development for the Indigenous storytellers so they can create, edit, and disseminate their digital stories. Ideally, IT developers would also be included to co-create or co-adapt the technologies being used by the storytellers. The DST process is grounded in Indigenous methodologies. Everyone has a role to play, but the workshops are carried out collaboratively with everyone learning from each other. Research presented suggests added layers to the model. There is the accountability of the audience to witness the story and respect the context from which the story emerges, including the community's ownership of that story. At an institutional level, it's important that government funding agencies, educational systems, and archiving institutions, such as museums, decolonize and indigenize the protocols so that the potential of DST is nurtured. Bizzle and Cordaweg view digital storytelling as a potential response to the Truth and Reconciliation Committee of Canada's calls to action, particularly numbers 62 and 63, which call for education for reconciliation. DST is a tool that could move Indigenous knowledge to the center of the curriculum, where marginalization is seen as a measurement from what's centralized. Indigenous voices can be amplified by digital storytelling. As a multimodal tool, aspects of DST align to Indigenous knowledge frameworks. However, there are risks associated with the creation, editing, and dissemination of digital stories. Research suggests that for digital stories to further Indigenous reconciliation, their development must be grounded in Indigenous methodologies, particularly relationality, non-duality, and community orientation. Examples abound of how Indigenous storytellers are utilizing technology to both preserve and evolve cultural knowledge, counter colonial narratives, and connect diverse Indigenous communities in solidarity. By integrating DST into curriculum in a culturally responsive way, it has the potential to expand the rhizome of Indigenous representation and reparation.